Life is confusing. We are told to be ourselves, but then rewarded for following societal norms. As life goes by, it's easy to feel like we become someone other than ourselves. We conform to work expectations, dating expectations, life expectations, and lose our true self. But it doesn't have to be this way. Today's guest, Christiana Cioffi, has made it her mission to win when the odds are stacked against her. Starting at West Point, where her graduating class consisted of less than 15% women, then in the military, where she was told she was too short to lead, and went on to become a decorated combat veteran and the only female officer at the time in a cavalry squadron. Then she managed to bust through the corporate glass ceiling to rise faster than her peers. Along the way, she was diagnosed with and beat cancer. Today, she is a professional speaker and empowerment coach, helping women in biotech to unlock their authentic selves in business and in life. Welcome, Christiana.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.
Let's quickly clarify something here, because that sounds really, really impressive. And there's a chance some people are like, well, great, this is just a superwoman or, somebody with superpowers. But let's clarify something for our listeners. Despite your success, you went from being fearless, decorated combat veteran, to a fear of being yourself. Can you tell us more about that and what happened?
Yeah. So what I think of having a fear of myself, that essentially was a lack of confidence. So the question is, how does somebody who's led in combat, has a Bronze Star, then lack confidence? Well, for me, I was changing careers. I was leaving the military. I had gone to West Point, then spent 5 years in the military. I knew it. I understood it. I trained to be in combat. So when I left the military and I went to get my MBA, I found myself surrounded by some incredibly smart, talented people. And I just felt a fish out of water. I felt they were and believed that they were better than me and smarter than me. So I started to develop an inferiority complex where maybe I wasn't so great, right? And I think we all go through that at some point in our life, perhaps multiple times in our life. We have that question of, am I good enough? Everybody around me seems to be so great. Maybe I don't belong here. So that's where I started as I transitioned into the civilian world. But I eventually got over it. And I know we're going to talk about that here. I got over that inferiority complex, which then allowed me to soar in my biotech career.
Let's just dive into that now, actually. When you say you got over it, like what steps did you take? Like, how did this work? Did you wake up one day and you're like, no longer, or what happened?
It took a while. It honestly took a while. It manifested originally during my MBA, where I was very nervous to speak in front of the rest of my class. We went through a cohort of 80 people. And mind you, when I was in the military, I used to do mission briefs of up to 80 people before we went out on the roads. So you would think speaking in front of 80 people about, the finance topic or reading the business case we had to discuss that day would be no big issue.
Right. Lower stakes or something, right?
Yeah. Low stakes. But all these people around me were saying such smart things, and it had been a while since I'd been in school. So it started then. It took a couple years before I even realized that I was becoming somebody very different. I'd already actually become that different person, and not for the better, in my opinion, because I'd lost that confidence. I'd lost that sense of self. So the first step is to recognize that you are not reaching your full potential as a person. You're not feeling like you are who you're meant to be or that you're on the right path. And for me, that was recognizing I had a stutter. I was turning bright red when I was talking in meetings, and I was just very nervous. And it was a fear of being myself or even coming out of my shell. So that was the first step. Recognize that you've got the fear.
And then from there, how did you go about actually addressing it?
Yeah, it was not a methodical process, which is what I am working now to coach women and help them learn from what I did, which was a lot of trial and error. But I started to recognize that there were a lot of supportive people around me. And these supportive people would say things that, for better or worse, you have a bad boss and a bad boss says something to you and it sticks with you. Well, what about the person that's in your camp, that's your advocate, and they say something positive? Why doesn't that stick as much as what a bad boss says? So I had somebody in my camp who said to me, Christiana, really, why are you so nervous in front of these people? They're just other humans. And that still resonates with me. It's been, 10 plus years since that person said that to me. And I say that now to other people. They're just other humans. Why are you so nervous around them? And that humanized, just the setting that I was in, realizing nobody's perfect, right? I don't have to be perfect. They're not perfect. It's okay. It's a safe environment.
I'm curious to know, I mean, the military is so predefined culture with code of honor. I mean, it's so well defined. And then all the principles that go with it. How did that translate for you? Like, did you carry some of those with you to MBA and post MBA and your success in the civilian world? Or you thought, you know what, that military stuff was just garbage. I'm going to recreate it from scratch.
Well, I definitely didn't think it was garbage. I think I wore a uniform for 9 years of my life. And now you see me in this magenta shirt and I got my hair curled. I never had that in the military. I didn't learn how to put on makeup and wear feminine clothes, out and have fun until I was in my late 20s. That's pretty late to kind of learn how to do that. So that's the part I shed, because that was me wearing, I thought, men's pajamas. They didn't have, our uniform when we were deployed, they were unisex. They weren't made for men or for women. So I was wearing these oversized, unflattering pajamas every day with some combat boots. So that I definitely left. I left push-ups. I don't do push-ups anymore. Not going to do it. But the core values that the military taught me, that West Point taught me, I definitely held on to that. Now, we all have different leadership styles. Even in the military, people have different leadership styles. So I learned, while I was at West Point and serving in leadership roles, to develop that leadership. And that is not based off of your rank or your title. It's about bringing people on the journey with you, inspiring them. So that's the key thing that I absolutely loved about the military that I've definitely taken with me.
What will be the number one leadership principle that you took with you?
So I would say treat other people with respect. That's the number one. Because if you treat other people with respect, what you're doing naturally is you're understanding who they are and what they offer. So that could be in a meeting, an informal meeting, for example, giving somebody the opportunity to speak, to have the table, to speak while they're sitting at the table. That's not always afforded in corporate America. And when you give somebody the respect of they're a professional and a colleague, you allow them the opportunity to step up and they become more of who they're meant to be in that professional setting. And that's leadership. Pave the way for others to become their fullest selves.
I think it's interesting enough, something a lot of leaders don't learn, that fundamental of what you just said. And that's where then there's that struggle later on in life, is in they're then expected to lead people and don't know how to guide them in that way.
Are most people that are leaders actually taught to be leaders? Do they do leadership training? I don't think so. So I think that's, that's part of the gap that's out there in the corporate world, is people have titles and they have leadership positions, but they've never really studied leadership and what that means or developed their own version of it.
Yeah, I always say there's a lot of managers of projects and managers of budgets, but very few leaders of people.
Yes, I agree. I'll actually be doing something on LinkedIn soon, distinguishing between what I characterize as a leader, as a manager, and then as a boss. Right? I think they're three distinct categories.
Actually, go into that a little bit more. I'm curious to kind of hear just at a high level what you described for each of them.
Yeah, so we talked about leadership. Leadership, I think, is about inspiring people around you to become the better version of themselves, do things they wouldn't otherwise think possible or that they were capable of doing. To me, a manager is somebody who maybe they've got a bit of investment in the people around them, in the people that they're managing, but they're not really inspiring. They're more delegating, if you will. And then a boss is somebody who really has no investment in their people. They're there maybe in a leadership role because of ego, because they want power. That's usually when we say we have a bad boss. They're not a leader. They're a bad boss. They're just telling you what to do. They don't really care much about anybody else other than themselves.
I think that's great. It's funny. Art and I, we were recently talking about, he might have had a post on LinkedIn too about just the idea of the term boss. Like it carries almost more of a negative connotation. And neither one of us ever liked really being called like a boss. That's not what we think or see ourselves for. I think many of the ways that you just described it, but it's still that generic term that's the easiest way for people to, that's the shorthand, because it's too hard to go through that mental math of being like, wait, do you got a leader, a manager, or a boss? So people still say boss, but it is like the, at least in that ladder that you just described, probably the last person you want to work for versus the manager and the preference of the leader. Does that sound?
I had to always correct people. Stop calling me boss. I'm your coach. Don't call me boss. And that's kind of the term I preferred using, because to me, as a leader, you're coaching people and helping them, remove obstacles or be the best they can be. And I always draw comparisons to sports, because a head coach, that's exactly what they do. They're not better than the players, but they actually can get them to be the best they can. So that's why I like the term coach at work. And I got my way, but it took a while because people were so conditioned to say boss.
I love that. I love coach because that's all about the people. A coach is nobody without the team players, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm curious, as you went back and you mentioned some of that, moving into the new role and after you gave your MBA and you come out, how much of that do you think might have been, though? Because when you are in the military, there's this clear structure for this period of time. And when you do move into an organization, each organization, while there is an overall structure, you have to almost relearn what that is. And it's not necessarily always based on a set of roles because it's so political. And I'm not saying there's not politics in Army everywhere else, but was a big piece of it needing to kind of find your footing again after you had come from knowing a structure so well? Or was the military also just as, could change just as easily as an organization from organization can?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know that I've thought about that too much. It's probably a factor. I did have a 2-year MBA program. So before I was back in corporate America, and I had an internship in between those 2 years in corporate America. So it was a bit of a warm up. But in the Army, my first deployment, for example, when I was a gun truck platoon leader, there was no structure. There was no structure. We didn't even have the training books. The training books for how to operate during that was 2005 into 2006 were still being written. And every year they were quickly evolving as our equipment changed and the weapons used against us were changed. So during that year, and I was out on the roads pretty much every single day, there was no structure. There was no, set mission we were going on. It was very different from day to day. So I think there is a part of me that became very resilient to being asked to do something without knowing what the next 12 hours would look like. But at the same time, there is that structure of the military where if something's not operating the way it should be, there is a way to escalate it. Now, I have personal experiences where the Army did not do things they should have done legally and to take care of people, which is maybe for another discussion. But in the corporate world, who makes those decisions to sweep something under the rug? It's a leader or a boss, right? And there's little consequence, for them not taking action when they should. That's the biggest thing that, I think when it comes to structure, is kind of the checks and balances exist in the military where they don't in the corporate world in some, not so great cultures.
Yeah. And I think that's that big variable is it's like you don't company to company, sometimes it's always interesting how when people interview for a role, what you interview for might be one thing. Then when you show up there, it's like, okay, what do you actually get? Or as soon as you change from one boss to another boss, it's a completely different dynamic, sometimes. And then it's how well do they navigate it as well. And anyway, it gets pretty complex, but something that you mentioned is you talked about, going through that process of your own, like you mentioned, which I completely relate to, the turning red. That's something I had done for a long time. This pale skin always made it so that whenever I was embarrassing, I think that showed up. But you were going down that pathway of how you, started overcoming that. And was it a matter of building up just your confidence over time by kind of proving to yourself, and then also telling yourself that these individuals that you that are just other humans, other people? Like what else was part of that? Because I feel like it's a struggle that people don't necessarily always overcome or stand in their way because that fear is so much that they don't push through.
confidence is woven through every aspect of our life. It's not just in the professional setting, it's in the personal setting. So, what my confidence was in, my lack of confidence was from fears that were in my mind, which were then manifesting them in the stutter, in turning red, being embarrassed, not speaking up, which I know a lot of people in the corporate world have those issues, especially early in their careers. But for me, on the personal side, I was also in a relationship that should have ended way before it did. So the confidence issues were also, maybe that's even part of the root of it too, right? They're all woven together. So if I'm not in a successful, happy relationship at home, it makes me wonder, am I worthy, et cetera, et cetera. So it comes down to my thoughts about myself. So I think a big part of me regaining my confidence was also finding the strength to exit a long-term relationship that was no longer serving me, nor was it serving him, right? It needed to end, but our lives were very, very heavily connected. So it was hard to end it. But when I realized I need to make these changes, it became easier. It became easier to take more risk at work and consciously speak up. And I would envision myself standing in an ice bath, right? Because I would get so flushed and so red. I would do breathing exercises as well. I would watch TED Talks about the power pose before you speak. I would practice speaking on topics I was really passionate about. And that gave me the confidence that, yeah, you can speak. For whatever reason, you're just not able to speak about this topic in front of these people. So maybe practice more. So I used all different types of techniques, and they just started to compound. While on the personal side, I was also regaining my confidence when it came to who I am and what I deserve and what I want out of a romantic relationship.
Which makes me really curious, and your book in the background there, and I'm curious the timing of all of that. And maybe I'm making incorrect, connections here, but I'm just very curious because we learn more about ourselves often in, relationships than we do at other point in our life. We learn what we like, what we don't like, and through that, who we are, who we want to be. But dating in its own right is scary. And I think a lot of people who face, those same sort of fears in anywhere, it's the rejection, it's the fear of judgment, these sort of things. So your book, Unapologetic Spinster, if I say it right, is basically what I believe your blog turned into in your stories of dating. And it was not just a couple of dates. It was how many that you captured?
I've been on a couple hundred first dates. Yeah.
Which is amazing. And I love that you said first, because you're like, yes, many of those, if you went to the ones that actually scaled to the second. So how much of that do you think really helped to, not that we're saying everybody, hey, go crash course, go on 200, dates, although, maybe, but I mean, what an amazing way to, I would assume, learn more about who you are and what you want. Is that fair? Was it almost like a form of therapy for yourself?
Absolutely. And I also did go to therapy. I'm a big believer in therapy. I think so many people can benefit from having the right therapist that can help guide them in a professional manner. So I think I agree with everything you said. When I was developing, at the peak of my insecurity at work, and I realized it wasn't serving me, I wasn't getting promoted, I had all these fears and issues. I was also simultaneously realizing what wasn't working for me anymore on the personal side. And so started to make those changes. They all kind of happened together. The relationship ended. I had this great freedom to go and explore who I was. So it was really the second time in my adult life. The first time, was right after I stopped wearing a uniform and I went and I got my MBA and I made changes. But then it was the end of a 10-year relationship and coming out of, I no longer want these fears. I no longer want to be this scared person. I want to regain that confidence I had in my early 20s, right? So it all happened at the same time. But dating, you said dating is scary. Dating can be scary. Dating shouldn't be scary. Dating, in my opinion, should be fun. And if you're not having fun when you're doing it, then you're doing something wrong. And that's, I think, what my book, An Unapologetic Spinster, it's true modern dating story. So it's taking the humor, the life lesson, the lessons I learned about myself and embracing that journey of growth. And that's ultimately what I think when we're looking for love, whatever the age is, we can find it. We just have to love ourselves first. And I did not love myself first. That was the problem in my early 30s. I did not love myself enough.
Can you share a couple of funny or embarrassing stories, whether they made the book or not?
Yeah. So I've got probably 20 something stories in my book. I think one of my favorites, I was running a race. I used to live in Boston. I was running an ultra marathon. I think this one was maybe 40 miles or so. I was out on a race course. It was very hot. We were doing these loops around the woods, 10-mile loops ad nauseum. And this guy dressed in a giant Bigfoot costume comes barreling down the path towards me, not in the middle of the woods. There's nobody around me. I haven't seen anybody since the last aid station like 20 minutes ago. And it was just, you're low on sugar, things are either funny or they're terrifying. And, I just like laughed as this guy like ran past me, and I ended up looping around, and he had taken his Bigfoot hat off and was sitting on a boulder on the side of the path. And I scared him, and like, hey, that's what you get for scaring people on the course, like karma, And so we got into this conversation, and he ended up following me. Mind you, it's very hot. I'm in short shorts and a sports bra. I'm practically naked, and Bigfoot's running behind me for like 2 miles to get to the aid station. And needless to say, we connected and we went out, and he was not the person for me, but he was a great guy. And it's just kind of shows you, if you're out there living your life and having fun and enjoying it, you don't know who you're going to meet. And, hopefully not in the middle of the woods, because that could be scary, but who you can meet and when you're going to hit it off and who's going to help you on that journey. So that was, like a really unique way to meet somebody that I ended up dating for a little bit.
It's like a spinoff of Beauty and the Beast, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
A modern take.
But I do think in scenarios like that, what you did with that is there's a lot of people who at that point would either be they could be angry, how they're that person that was messed up, and how are you going to do that when somebody's out here in their own. There are others who could look at it with humor, but there's probably a few others who would end up going and approaching the person. And again, I'm curious, at this point of your journey, as you looked at the different dates, at that point, had you been on, half of those, whatever 100 dates, like, were you, it still takes something for individuals. I know before you'd said to me, well, dating doesn't have to be scary. And I agree with that. And while I've been in a relationship for so long that I don't remember how to date, but there's always, Art and I, when we worked at Macy's back in the day, there was this individual there, and he would every day, have different phone numbers. This was, some of this was early days. He still had kept a beeper around too. That was just the type of character he was. But anyway, but he himself, and I remember he goes, we're like, aren't you worried that, you're going to get rejected? And, this wasn't the, sorry, I'll say it out loud. He wasn't like the most charming or most best looking person. But as he said, it's up to bats. And he's like, as long as I kept doing this, then whatever. And he was so courageous because of that. And like he was always super comfortable with that. So that's where I think that some people, they stand in their own way and they don't get to that. But just with this example here, as well as this example of, we'll say, Tony's, name that I'm referencing here, there are some people who seem to get over that initial edge and instead look at it and see the human on the other side and say, well, what if they do reject me? Let's get to the rejection faster so I can move on to the next one. Like, how did you start approaching that when you started going on these dates? Were you always comfortable with it, or did you initially get uncomfortable, and then as you kept going by, eventually you hit number 12 and you're like, here we go, it's just another?
Well, the common theme here from what we talked about earlier is the lack of confidence I had in speaking up in meetings and being reminded that people are just humans, right? So when you're super insecure in meetings and you don't want to speak up, sometimes it's because you don't know how to join in on the conversation. But the other part is that what you're going to say is not valuable enough. And I just had a client tell me that the other day. She's like, I don't know if I have enough, good things or important things to say, so I sit on the sidelines. Well, you got to try, right? And you've got to, make the effort and hope that if it's as well received as it can be, that you have a friendly audience. So it's no different than speaking up in a meeting and hoping that, or thinking, hey, I believe this thought about the business, or here's an insight I want to share, and that others in the room are going to appreciate what you have to offer. Now, if they don't, then, maybe there's some lesson about, you're learning. Everybody, I think, shows you a mirror of what you can improve upon. So for dating, for me, it was around the same time I was starting to shed that fear. I was speaking up more in meetings. I was getting promoted at this point. I was advancing my career and building that confidence in the workplace. And I found that confidence is the number one factor in successful dating. Number one, it doesn't matter what you wear, where you go, what you talk about. Confidence. It's that aura that you have about yourself that somebody is like, I feel comfortable with them, because they too are probably nervous. So it's the mindset, and you have to just practice it. And no, I was not always like that, but I learned pretty quickly, because I'm a competitive person and I wanted to see how many second dates I could get. And so it was like that I was trying to see how many dates can I go on, because I believed it to be a numbers game, which I don't believe it's a numbers game. So I don't advise going on as many dates as you can, unless you want to be more comfortable in practice. But, I think it's about confidence. And if you're not confident to just put yourself out there, and remember, honestly, it's not personal if somebody you've never met is not interested in you, right? What are the chances that you're a match made in heaven? It's pretty slim. So give some grace to the other person as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, the parallels, and this is just what I do love, because whether dating or whether it's in that workplace, the confidence component of it is just so key. But I also think in the workplace, there's a chance that person that you're not going to make everybody happy in the workplace. But if you try to make everybody happy in the workplace, then you're probably going to make very few people, if any people, happy. And so I do think, it's like, just like somebody may have rejection, they may say something, somebody may look at them in that strange way. But then at the same time, and I forget what the TED Talk was, but it was about, when we do put ourselves out there, often what happens is if you do fall down, people aren't normally all coming around, laughing and pointing. Instead, you now have usually somebody or others in the room who acknowledge and are like, oh, I've got that person's back. And they might actually speak up to be able to, I tried to be that person in the room whenever I could for individuals, because I knew that was uncomfortable and I knew what it took for them to go out on the ledge to do that. But I think through that, it's kind of, we always go to the negatives. What if, what if they don't like us? What if they judge us? But there's so many positive what ifs that you never get to if you can't at least put out whatever it is that you have in mind, that I think a lot of people.
And the what ifs are always the worst case scenario you think of, that have such a small chance of actually happening. But you make them into this big thing in your head, like, oh my God, what if this happens? You're like, well, what if it doesn't? And it's probably that's a higher chance of happening. But I see that a lot too. People make this fear in their head so big that paralyzes them from taking action.
Yeah, it's anxiety, right? I probably will always have some level of anxiety. I actively work on it in different ways, but also, that's the fear, the focus, the obsession about the future and all those what if scenarios. And I do agree with what you said, Mike, around in most environments, work environments, even in a very toxic work environment, there's usually one or two people that are very friendly in that audience. So when people ask me, how do I build my stage presence? So keep in mind, I was stuttering and I was turning red. Now I love the stage. Now I am a professional speaker as well. And I've done a lot of speaking in my marketing biotech career, and I love it. So how do you build that confidence too? You look for the friendly faces in the audience. You don't think, you can think if you want, about them in their underwear. I don't know if that's productive or not, but you don't focus on the negative. You don't focus on, somebody out there, they really don't like me. My frenemy is in the front row. No, you look at the friendly people that are really there to support you and believe that. And then that's how you're gonna, present yourself with confidence, with feeling like you are in a safe environment.
It's a great point. It's like, perform, if you will, for those individuals, not everybody else in there you're trying to make happy. Because at least in the end there, that you're. I remember a team member once had said to me afterwards, he goes, "It's like you were, talking directly to me that whole time." And to be honest, I don't know that I remember even looking as much at her, but what I had trained myself to do is look for some of those friendlies, and this was one of those friendlies that I could turn to. But in the end here, she appreciated it because it felt like I was really connecting, with it. So you have that benefit that you can then really connect with these other people instead of, looking at anybody's frowns or whatever else they might do to worry that you're not getting them. And the other thing about the friendlies is they're usually going to smile and nod because they're there, with you, even if some of it's through these slight awkwardness. They're just looking at me, aren't they? This whole way. We worked with an individual who was brilliant up on stage. And what was really helpful for me to hear from him once is, I'm like, man, you're just a natural up there. And then I had the chance to present with him. And through that, you saw how much practice and what he did to come across looking natural up there. And I think that's what a lot of people forget or overlook, is that, sometimes these people who seem like pros, they're only pros because they're putting in, the reps, if you will, and the time to come across that way, which it sounds a lot like, again, for you, as you, transform, however we want to say, your yourself, to being much more comfortable there. Because to go from, turning red, stuttering, not really wanting to speak up, to literally now doing it and showing up for a living, I mean, that's pretty incredible.
You had a successful career in biotech. Most people would have probably loved to be in your shoes, but you decided to leave that behind and now start a new chapter.
Yeah. So marketing is something I did for the last 11, 12 years. I am very good at marketing objectively. It's something I can create a brand plan, in a closet, on my own. It's not hard for me. It's a skill set I really threw myself into, and I became the master of my trade. And then as I, over that time, became more comfortable and confident with who I was, it was part of writing my book, right? It was a creative expression of myself while I had a full-time job. But writing the book wasn't hard because I felt so inspired. I felt so connected to who I was. So as I've moved on this journey, and when I took the last pharma job I had, I even told the CEOs, the one who hired me, I said, this is my last job in the industry. You're going to get my best work. You're going to get my most innovative ideas. We're going to blow it out of the water. And that's what I did for a year and a half. We won awards. We were nominated and shortlisted for other awards that we didn't win, but it was still so incredible, such an incredible experience with some of the most amazing people that I had the chance to work with. And so I checked all those boxes because marketing was, something I wanted to do, wanted to accomplish, and be a vice president by the age of 40. And I did it. And then as I got there, I was like, you know what? It's not just about title. There's more that I need to explore from my creative side, like open that part of me up. And that's what I'm pursuing. I want to give back to people to help them do things and be the person they're meant to be with passion. And that'll drive the skill set. So being an empowerment ambassador, I feel I'm very passionate about that, but it also allows me to be creative in a certain way to help solve problems with people. And then I plan to write another book. So I've got a lot of other creative things, but biotech, in-house marketing, it's not my passion anymore. So I've got to find the next thing, and I'm building that path now.
I think that's so important too, because, I know I faced it where it's like, okay, also similar in 40 markets, like, now what? Because what I did, this whole time, this was interesting. This is great. Build up a career for me. In this case, it was in media industry. Many people would love to do that. But it's like, after a while, two things for me. One, I'm just like, no, I for me, the entrepreneur side of it, that has always been something I'm like, I want to prove that. And I have kids and I want them to see that that's another possibility. But I'll admit that what was really interesting is I stepped away as I realized, the person I had become still wasn't exactly that person that I would have become or that I want to be, because oftentimes, especially when you're in corporate environment, people do play up to this degree still of, okay, well, this is what this boss needs. This is what the organization wants. And in some ways, even values, like we all go in, we have these set of values, but oftentimes there becomes this like mixed thing that happens between your values and the values of a company, because just like they can in any relationship, you spend so much time with these individuals that all of a sudden it's like, okay, who am I? So I want to double click into that for a second, because that's a big piece of your, I think, approach, and you help people as well, as helping them rediscover their core values. Could you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So an example would be core value of honesty, right? That's one of my, having a strong moral compass, understanding we all have our own, prongs of the compass that speak to us the most. But for me, honesty is a really big part of it, and, do no harm. And so when you're in you've got to figure out what it is that's important to you. What do you hold as your values that creates who you are, what you stand for, and God is your guiding light. So as an example, I've been in some companies and I've worked for bosses. I've had a bunch of bad bosses, And if they, I was at a company for a very short period, and this was right as I was also battling breast cancer, I realized my health is more important, and I do not appreciate the lack of honesty and the lack of alignment that this company is operating in with respect to my personal values. And so I quit. I just left. And so as I coach women, it's also understanding who they are and what they hold to be very important to them at their core. And, there's a lot of different exercises you can do that. There's, hundreds of different values that you could select from, but there's probably 3 to 5 that are repetitive that people, will cling to. And so finding out then if those core values align with their current role, with their current culture and the company they're in. And if so, awesome. If not, can they find another opportunity in that, elsewhere in the organization? Or maybe, it's tough to say, but maybe this isn't the right place for you. Maybe you will thrive and you will feel more authentic if you're somewhere that aligns better with those core values. And they'll never match up 100%, like you said, but they can get pretty close.
Yeah, I think, there's so much that you had said there that I think is so important because first off, I wish in school more people actually got into and understand core values. Because even for me, I'll admit later on as I dove into more, it was when I dove into understanding culture more and learning from that perspective, from a company perspective almost, like Zappos and others, have really great books and literature on it. But the challenge is I feel like a lot of people as they go through growing up and through school, don't actually learn to think about the core values. And then I think when people make decisions on careers, they make decisions based on, I don't know, their aunt over here said, you should really be this, or, their parents said this, or their friends are like, I think I'm doing this. And people start making decisions sometimes based on not values, but based on, what they want to pursue. And again, at that age, you might not even have all your values figured out, but there's not really much of a thought process and exercise for people to do that until I think they get a bit older and they start thinking about it in those terms. But I would still say that's probably why so many people are unhappy in jobs is because of this mismatch that they actually haven't got to the bottom to figure out. And I'm curious if that's what you've seen as well.
Yes. I think what you're speaking to are societal expectations. So societal expectations can come from those close to you. They're often, I believe, they first come to you when you're young, right? And whether you're in a certain culture, you're a certain gender, you're what other experiences and places that you kind of rose up, these societal expectations come on you. And so as a woman, that's my basis of the societal expectations. I see them coming at me from like who I'm supposed to be as a woman. And then I've spent, 2 decades in male dominated industries, the military, and then biotech is very much male dominated from a leadership standpoint. And so, and I wrote a book about being unapologetic because it is about rejecting the societal expectations, but we sometimes don't realize that we even have them. And maybe, I wanted to be a lawyer when I was young because my dad was a lawyer, right? So it's like, I want to seek that, not because he ever told me I needed to be a lawyer. He probably would have told me not to be one, but I wanted that acceptance from him. And that was just, that had shaped, my thoughts and my beliefs. And so I think when we have these beliefs, we have to recognize, do they serve us, right? And do we believe the belief to be true? And if we say yes, then do we believe the belief to be 100% true? Because often if you believe something to be true and then you say, is it 100% true? Is that maybe not? You start to poke holes in it and then you can dive a little bit deeper.
I love that. And again, I love how you tie the unapologetic aspect into it, because I do think that it's an interesting thing that we see. A lot of people, when they talk about what they might want from their life, it's not the way they're approaching living their life, because to get often what I think a lot of people might consider, and everybody takes success and happiness and that in their own way, but I think a lot of people, if you ask them and they were dreaming, they would say, I want these things. But the way that we then go about living our life on a daily basis is only going to get us this type of life. And I think that being able to break free is such a challenge for so many to do. And I do think that, for some, it comes down to reaching a point in our lives later where we feel a little bit more, again, confidence. Sometimes this is what might happen to somebody in their careers is Art and I can relate, as you hit in your 40s and suddenly you're like, okay, between knowing that you can make a certain amount of money, knowing that you have a certain amount of money in the bank, like you feel a little bit more confident about walking out on that. Well, maybe not on the ledge, but, but being able to take these risks that otherwise you were so afraid to do earlier. So I'm just curious, how would you, if somebody's coming out of, college at this point and, they're nervous and anxious about this, like, what would you tell them about how they could live a more unapologetic them?
Yeah, I don't think you have to have all the answers, especially when you're coming out of college. You're still figuring out who you want to be, right? You've left structure to some extent. You've been kind of protected, and now you're going out into the wild, right? So I think you've got to have compassion for yourself that you may be a very different person 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And that's okay. I think that's what life is about, is evolving and growing, but learning as you grow. So I think being open to to figuring things out, to give yourself compassion that you might try something and you might fail. And that's okay. It's a learning opportunity. And remember that everybody and everything is teaching you something. And so the sooner you kind of open up to, I can be and I can do anything. We're told that. But at the same time, we're told, but you can be anything, but you're going to be this in this kind of confine. And so if you drop that caveat and you really think, I can really be and do anything, then and you start that earlier in your life, then you're able to kind of pursue what it is you actually want to be or do. But, that could change. I don't know. For the rest of my life, am I going to be doing what I'm doing? Probably not. Like, I'm going to do this for a period of time because I'm passionate about it and I'm enjoying it and I'm helping other people. And that's important to me. But I'm going to have other interests that are going to come in, and I'm going to want to explore those interests because that's part of my growth and development. And so just recognize you don't need to have all the answers, but, surround yourself with people that are supportive of you, the authentic you, not the person they want you to be.
That's a great way to put it. And I think the just honing in on the experiment thing that you mentioned is people look at it, it's like they don't have all the answers in, but that's what each new thing that they engage with gives them that experience around. And again, I can't help but take it back to dating. Each of those dates in some ways is an experiment in its own right. And I think as people can approach it and think about how they can at least get that experience to help better define what it is that they want to pursue. And I think even like with values, even values over time can change because, as you get older, as you get more experience, as you have, come across more things that impact you, then you may decide to focus your life differently in that way as well.
I want to take it back a little bit. To some degree, everybody faces some tragedy, some setback, some scare. And it's the mindset and how you react to those that makes a difference. Some people might, go into a cocoon. Some people use it for good and growth. How much of your battle with your cancer has impacted what you're doing now? And what was your mindset throughout the process?
Oh my goodness. That was December of 2018. I was diagnosed days after my 36th birthday. So I had elected, and I was working in the biotech space. I was working in oncology. So not in breast cancer, but I was working in oncology. So there's a funny coincidence, I guess. But I had connections to help, and I knew based off of what I did for work, like, how I can get the best care. So the care and getting world-class care and I was in Boston, very lucky to go to Dana-Farber. And I still actually go there, even though I don't live in Boston anymore. That was okay. That was a big checked box. I also felt that I needed to find my own treatment path, right? And so I elected for an aggressive approach. I had a double mastectomy and a reconstruction. I was lucky enough to not need radiation and chemo, but I'm still, 5 years later, I'm actually coming off of my therapy, my medication this month. So it's kind of a big deal. But, so the medical support was fine. It was all the stuff in my mind about why did I get cancer? Nobody in my family's ever had breast cancer. They've been twice my age before they've gotten it. I'm negative for all genetic markers. Did I bring this on myself? I'd experienced heartbreak. I was single at that point. I was dating. I had fallen in love. I was, probably didn't have a healthy attachment style in relationships. I was still working on myself. So I was holding on to all this emotion. And so I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life living in fear that cancer would come back. So there was a moment very early on that exactly 5 years ago, I ended up selling my house. I moved to Boston and lived in an apartment. That made it easier to go on all those hundreds of dates. I just, I'm going to change my life. This is the catalyst. This is the wake up call. This small progress I'm making. I said, I'm full throttle. I am changing my life for the better. And so I got deep into meditation. I started very much focusing on who was in my life. I did a cleanse of people if they were not the right energy, if they were not, people I thought were on the right path with me, then it's time to kind of move on in my life. So I quit my job, right? It was like nope, but definitely not where I want to be long-term, goodbye. And so I've been unapologetic in that respect of my life, my health is very important to me, and meditation's a big part of that. I also was a runner then, but I threw myself into physically, said I want to prove that I'm physically okay. And so perseverance and resilience became the theme of that year. And that's when I ran 3 road marathons, and I ran a 50K, a 40 miler, and a 50 miler, all within 8 months of my surgery. And so, there was pain that I had. It was not comfortable, but I said, there was not going to be any doubt mentally, physically, emotionally, that I am better than when it was before I had cancer. And that's kind of how I like to live my life, not in a place of fear, but of one of, I can control so much in my life, and I take it seriously. So I think that's also what I'm giving back to these women that I want to help empower in biotech. It's about they have control. They can control how they think about themselves, what words they use to describe themselves, how they bring themselves to the table or not, right? And give that power back to them.
I would definitely say, to credit to the late Kobe Bryant right behind me. Sounds like you definitely have Mamba mentality that was driving you in that period. And do you still, there are people go with, ebbs and flows around motivation and drive. Do you continuously draw on that moment 5 years ago to motivate you and give you that boost? Or is it one of those things that's in the past now and you don't think about it?
It's weird. Maybe I'm very different. I feel like my past is very much compartmentalized. I remember, life before I had my first day at West Point. It kind of lives in a box. And then there was my West Point and Army years. And then there was, transitioning. And then, part of this, the pharma career. I think somewhere in there after cancer, I kind of closed another chapter, and it's compartmentalized. I don't ever describe myself very infrequently. I mean, I probably do sometimes, but I try not to describe myself as a breast cancer survivor, because that's a label, right? It's sure, I battled cancer. So many people do. So many people have other hardship. So I think it's helped me shape who I am, and it was a catalyst, but I would describe myself as many other things. And, if I had to use labels, it's not the first thing it would use, and it doesn't embody. I don't know I don't know how to embody breast cancer survivor. I'm just like full of life, and I love myself, and those are results of partly of beating cancer and finding myself on the other side, but they're also for going on a couple hundred first dates and writing a book. So there's, I think it's in the past, but I appreciate and I have gratitude for what I experienced, because without it, I wouldn't have changed my life the way that I did.
I love how you captured that too. And just sometimes I've thought about it, and I've always been careful about how I approach that, but that mentality of looking at it, as a survivor piece of it versus, the piece that's looking at it as, okay, yeah, it's a compartment, but now it's like, no, you're looking at this thing that you're creating now, and this is who you are into the today. That's not a part of you, but it's kind of like each of those things in the past, they build up and they add to make somebody who they are. But for you, it's now, it sounds like you're looking at, the what's next and what are you doing now and how are you helping people. You're so busy. You got such a vibrant, exciting future you're looking at that that's where the space is, it feels like.
Exactly.
For you.
Yeah.
On that, what is next for you?
So I'm standing up the business now for coaching. I got clients coming in and also the professional speaking because I am fresh out of leaving the pharma world as of last month. So in 2023. So 2024 for me is a total different professional endeavor, really throwing myself into making an impact for women in biotech. That's the number one professionally. I'd love to write another book. I plan to write one at some point, start that in 2024. And then I've got a lot of personal things that I want to make sure I fill my life up with. I built a house and I moved into a house in West Virginia, and I want to enjoy this. I want to enjoy the community that I now live in. I believe I fall madly, madly in love this year. Like, I know it's about to happen, and I am going to enjoy that, and have a family one day. I don't believe it's too late for me. So I've just got so much that personally and professionally I believe is going to start happening this year. And I'm just trying to stay grateful for all the abundance in my life and continue to be excited for what's to come. But those are a couple of the big things.
Just stay away from another Bigfoot chasing you.
Hey, I don't know.
Maybe not.
Not the real thing. Maintenance chances. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. You never know. Your book, do you know what the topic would be at this point?
I don't know. I got a couple. It depends on what happens. I might make something around the professional side that I'm doing because I think unapologetic and authentic are kind of very much tied together. It could be, if I have a kid and I do that on my own, maybe it's an unapologetic Spencer as a baby. I don't know. I'm going to let it come to me. And when I know, I will know.
Yeah. I pictured the Boss Baby book when you said unapologetic for a baby for whatever reason. I don't know if you read that. Okay. You just mentioned, as you start this new path. So how do you go about, what does that look like for you? Like, how are you going to attract your customers? What's your high level strategy? Because there's plenty of people who listen to our podcast as well who are trying to think about their next chapter in that way. So I'm just curious, for you to take that jump, say, okay, see you later, here we go. What in your mind do you have as the path about how you're going to now start bringing in, customers, income, etc.?
So, there's a lot of different social media platforms, and based on the business, people choose one over the other. For me, LinkedIn is the primary one. I have a pretty healthy network there already. So I've not been one to post content, but I have recently started to post content because I have so much I want to share, even if it's, just to let other people know, here's a tidbit that can help you, because I don't need to have somebody pay me to know that, making an impact and pay it forward for them. And that's important to me. So I do want to, take all these ideas, these lessons, these things I've learned and share it with the community. And I believe that also will create the clientele that will come to me because they'll know that I have thoughts. I am an authority in this space. So LinkedIn's my platform. The others are kind of just they're not something I'm using too much, maybe a little more for the book or just for fun. So I think for other listeners out there, where is your audience and how can you start to demonstrate that you are an authority in that space, build the rapport with a growing audience, and then start the outreach and turn that into an actual business. For me, doing empowerment ambassador, which is a phrase I coined, I don't think anybody else has used it, but it speaks to what I'm trying to do for people, is also very closely tied to professional speaking for me. So it's this similar audience, biotech and women, and empowering them. So they go together, and I expect that to help to further build my brand as I set up this empowerment ambassador platform.
And you mentioned that some of the following that you have. Have you been building that over time, or is that just something that, as part of your network that you just have known throughout the years?
I think I've built it passively. I've never had the intent. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, am I going to use LinkedIn to build a new business? I would have said, no, what are you talking about? I would never do that. I think I just built because I moved companies so much in the biotech space. I've just, a year and a half, 2 years, and I'm not okay with what's happening from a leadership standpoint. I'm going to leave. And so as I've done that, my network has become pretty spread out and pretty large. So it's just naturally grown, and I have just cultivated some of those relationships, but now it's purposeful. There is information I really do want to share. So it's very recent, that transition for me.
But I think that's a huge takeaway and something for people to keep in mind themselves. Is like, it sounds like when you did go about it, it's like you made sure that it was your network. You know, some people don't build out much of a network on LinkedIn or other places, or if so, it's, you know, call it the Facebooks, Instagrams, more rather of just the friends. But in just building that out there, you know, you never know when you tap into it in the future, whether it's around something like this, because, you know, you're making that pivot to, you know, call it a new, you know, career, however you want to say it, or whether it's because of the industry and stuff. But it's a shock to me still, as we've been more active on LinkedIn, to see and to know our own past about how people barely take advantage of what can be such a powerful way to build out a professional network, let alone if you go into coaching or other services later.
Yeah. And I think you've got to use the platform you're most comfortable with. I really struggled with Instagram. I'm not like I don't enjoy that. I'm enjoying doing things on LinkedIn. It feels natural to me. So if it is a struggle, then maybe that's a sign that it's not the right platform for you, or you got to do something different to make it feel more natural.
I agree when it comes to sales and how you get out there. But that question is, for so many people don't like networking in their jobs in general. And so sometimes it's like, how do we, you know, kind of go back to some of the other stuff? How do people push themselves sometimes in how they will foster that thing that's going to be beneficial for them long term if the initial response is that, I don't know, I don't want to call I hate it, but is kind of a resistance to it because it feels like that afterthought. And I'm saying this somewhat too, just because, you know, I know when we look at it now, when I have people who reach out and they're asking for help and they're like, okay, I'm trying to find a job now. It's like, gosh, this is when you wanted that network on LinkedIn, you know, built up so that now you could reach out, because now it comes otherwise cold, versus at least having something that you had been fostering there. So that's where I do think, from a career perspective, even if it's uncomfortable, that to me is one of those where I believe anyway that people should still push themselves a little bit past that comfort zone, because you may not find that same network on, you know, TikTok, Facebook, you know, the others of the world, but it still comes down to your connections to people. So I guess that's the question. Are you fostering those some way or another? Sounds like it's what you're
Yes.
emphasizing.
Definitely.
Okay, last thing for you, and then we'll have to, you know, figure out exactly where people can find you. But I thought it was a very interesting approach that you had where on your website, you actually have application on there for people who were for dating candidates. Do you get applicants coming through that method, or is it more for, you know, fun at this point?
So I have two websites. I have, and I know we'll mention it in a second here, but that's my book website. So I put that up when I launched my book, For an Unapologetic Spinster, and I have actually had applicants come through. So again, like, that website is to show my book's not a dating advice book. It's, you know, a little bit of Sex in the City meets Eat, Pray, Love, right? So it's not, it's humorous. It's meant to be an enjoyable read. And so I wanted that to come through on the website. And part of this creative, you know, bit that I was trying to like bring out was like, what if I just take applications on my website? Because I am not on the dating apps anymore. I did not enjoy the dating apps. I no longer do them. So this seemed like a natural way for somebody to reach out to me. So yes, I'm taking applications. I encourage anybody who's interested to go to the website. There's some, you know, some disclaimer information there they should probably read before they press submit, though.
How many applications have made it through to the second round?
A handful, a good handful have made it through.
That's great.
I would love for us to be able to say from our podcast, somehow you met that, you know, love of your life because they went and applied.
Yeah, maybe they should put that in the comment section. If you're listening to this and we get married, you know, we'll do something at the wedding to commemorate this moment.
That's hilarious. Okay, how otherwise can our audience find you?
Yes, so LinkedIn would be the best spot to meet me. We can connect on LinkedIn. I would love that. My website is ChristianaCioffi.com. So Christiana is like Christina, but there's an extra A in there. Christiana, and Cioffi is CIO. F as in Frank, F as in Frank, I. So ChristianaCioffi.com is the best place. And my book, if you read my book, you can find it on Amazon. And I have a website for that too, unapologeticspinster.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
We'll make sure to link to all of those in the description of the podcast. So Don't be feared. You have to write that as a note right now. And please share and, comment and tell us what you think about the episode.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you.